I hadn't even unpacked the U-Haul before the HOA came crashing down on me like a SWAT team with clipboards. My name's Silas Broadley. Just bought a fixer-upper ranch-style house on a quiet cul-de-sac in a small Georgia neighborhood. Thought I scored a deal. Turns out, I bought a house next to the gates of HOA hell. The second my truck touched the driveway, a bleach-blonde middle-aged woman in yoga pants and a rhinestone visor marched up like she owned the soil under my tires. "I'm Deborah Calloway," she announced, arms crossed like a bouncer. "President of the Oak Brush Heights HOA," I nodded, trying to be polite. "Silas Broadley, I'm just moving in today." "You should have notified the board of your moving date. We require a minimum of 14 days' notice for move-ins. That's in the bylaws." I blinked. "You serious?" She held up a laminated rule sheet like it was gospel. "Dead serious, and that truck is oversized. It's not allowed to be parked in this neighborhood overnight." I glanced at my truck, then back at her. "It's a U-Haul. I'm not moving in with a Prius." Deborah's lips tightened. "I already called the police. You're in violation. You called 911 over me moving into my own house." "They'll be here shortly," she said with a shrug like she'd just ordered takeout. I laughed in disbelief. "Lady, I own this house." "I have the deed in the glove box." "That doesn't matter. This is a deed-restricted community. You signed binding HOA agreements when you bought this property." "Nope," I said, leaning against the truck. "My property was exempt from the HOA when I bought it. It's on a split parcel." I checked with the county and the title company before I signed anything. Her nose wrinkled. "That can't be right." "It is. Your jurisdiction ends at the mailbox and mine's on the other side of the street." She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "We'll see what the police say." And right on cue, a cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, calm but clearly annoyed. One of them walked over to me. "Everything all right, sir?" "Just moving into my house. She called you over it." Deborah jumped in. "He's moving in illegally." "Oversized truck, no notice to the board, and he hasn't submitted paint color options for the shutters." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, this isn't a police matter. He's on his property. Unless there's a disturbance or trespassing, we can't intervene." "He's violating community standards," she snapped, her voice climbing an octave. The second officer stepped forward. "HOA issues are civil. We're not here to enforce neighborhood rules." I opened the glove box, pulled out the deed, and handed it to the officer. "Says right there parcel split. My side isn't in the HOA." They read it, nodded, and handed it back. "Looks like he's correct," the officer said. "You'll need to take this up with your HOA board, ma'am, not 911. Deborah's face turned red. "This is outrageous. He'll bring down the value of the entire street." "I haven't even taken the plastic off the couch yet," I said. "Maybe let me unpack before accusing me of destroying civilization." She stormed off toward her golf cart, muttering about lawsuits and devalued properties as the police tipped their hats and drove off. I stood there for a second, then turned back to the truck. All I wanted was to move in and hang my TV. But now I knew I wasn't just dealing with a home. I was dealing with a war zone, and Deborah Calloway had just drawn first blood. 2 days after the move, I was ankle-deep in drywall dust and half a dozen open paint cans, trying to turn the avocado green kitchen into something that didn't look like it belonged in a 1970s cooking show. The house was quiet, but I could feel the eyes. Every time I stepped out to toss scraps into the dumpster, it was like something shifted behind curtains across the street. Then came the envelope. No stamp. No return address. Just slid under my front door like a ransom note. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper with a printed message in all caps. "Your activities have been noted. Modify exterior structures immediately or face enforcement." I stared at it for a moment, trying to puzzle out what they meant by exterior structures. I hadn't changed anything yet, unless they were referring to the temporary dumpster I'd rented, which sat in my driveway on my side of the parcel line. I walked outside to double-check. Sure enough, someone had slapped a bright orange sticker on the dumpster that read, "Violation, unauthorized construction debris." No official seal, no city code cited. Just a fake-looking form with Oakbrush Heights Community Standards Committee typed across the top in Comic Sans. I peeled it off and went back inside. I wasn't surprised. I'd seen people like Deborah in politics before, small-time authority figures who got a taste of control and never let go. But I wasn't about to roll over. That night, I installed 4 cameras. One pointed at the driveway, one above the front door, one covering the backyard, and one facing the street. The next morning, I caught exactly what I expected. Deborah and a man I recognized from the neighborhood walking up to the dumpster with a roll of stickers and a clipboard. She slapped another violation notice on the side, then took a photo with her phone. I turned the footage into clips, saved them to a USB stick, and went down to the county zoning office. I wanted someone official to confirm I was in the clear. The clerk took one look at the parcel number and pulled it up on her screen. "You're not under their jurisdiction," she said. "This house is part of the original subdivision before the HOA formation. You're grandfathered out, no obligation to comply with their rules." "Would you be willing to put that in writing?" I asked. 5 minutes later, I had a signed letterhead document from the county confirming my exemption. I made 10 copies. I dropped one in Deborah's mailbox. The retaliation started within 48 hours. First, a white sedan started parking across my driveway at night, barely enough space for me to pull in. I checked the plate. Belonged to someone 2 streets over, someone I'd never met. When I knocked on their door, a teenager answered and told me his mom said I owed her friend an apology. Next morning, the car was gone. In its place, a handwritten sign had been staked into my lawn: "Non-compliant property subject to review." I yanked it out and tossed it in the trash. That night, the sign was back. This time, zip-tied to the tree in my front yard. I checked the footage. Same guy from before, walking up in the middle of the night, hammering the stake into the ground like he was planting a flag. I filed a police report. The officer who came out was younger, maybe late 20s, with a buzz cut and a name tag that read R. Gutierrez. I showed him the footage. He watched in silence, then asked, "You got a history with this guy? Never met him before." "But he seems to be real tight with the HOA president." "Looks like trespassing," Gutierrez said, "and possibly harassment. You want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said. "Just want a paper trail for now." He nodded and made a copy of the footage. "Let me know if it escalates." It did. The next week, I ordered a shipment of reclaimed wood beams for ceiling work. The delivery truck showed up right on time, but as the driver tried to back in, 2 golf carts blocked the street. The drivers refused to move, claiming it was emergency HOA maintenance. The truck eventually gave up and left. I had to reschedule delivery and pay a fee. I filed a second report, then I started digging. Deborah had a paper trail. Most folks in the neighborhood didn't know the HOA had been quietly increasing dues over the past 5 years. Not by much, just enough that no one noticed, but I found the financial statements online. The kicker: the neighborhood's landscaping contract, supposedly with Evergreen Estates Solutions, was paying twice the market rate. I looked up the contractor's business license. It was registered to a man named Reggie Calloway, Deborah's son. I printed everything, every invoice, every rate sheet. Then I went door to door. Most people were polite but cautious. A few were openly supportive. One elderly couple, the Marshalls, offered me sweet tea and told me how Deborah fined them $200 for non-uniform mailbox paint. The paint, by the way, matched the original color from when the community was built. "She told us we were setting a bad tone," Mrs. Marshall said. I cried for a week. I asked if they'd be willing to talk to a lawyer. Mr. Marshall just nodded and said, "Anything to see her knocked off that pedestal." By the end of the week, I had a stack of signatures and a folder of documentation. I called a friend, Maya, a civil attorney I'd worked with years ago. She specialized in HOA abuse cases. I emailed her everything. Within 2 days, she was in town, sitting in my living room with a legal pad and a laptop. "This is bigger than harassment," she said. You've got fraud, conflict of interest, misuse of funds, and at least one count of impersonating a municipal authority. That fake violation sticker, that's a criminal offense in this county. What's the play? We file for injunctive relief. If we can prove the HOA acted outside its bounds, even once they'll lose a chunk of their enforcement rights. But that's just the start. If we find out they used HOA funds to pay family businesses without disclosure, that's embezzlement. And the cops, they'll be interested once we show them the money trail. That night, I heard tires crunching gravel. I stepped outside and saw a black SUV idling at the end of my driveway. The windows were tinted. After a moment, it drove off slowly. The next morning, I found a dead squirrel nailed to my fence. I didn't bother calling Gutierrez this time. I brought the footage and photos straight to the county prosecutor's office. By the end of the day, I got a call back. They were opening an investigation. The HOA thought they were untouchable. They thought they could run their little kingdom unchecked. They were wrong, because now it wasn't just me fighting back. It was the law. The Oakbrush Heights HOA didn't make their next move quietly. It started with a notice on my door, delivered by a man in a gray blazer who didn't introduce himself but handed me a thick envelope and walked off like he was late for a flight. Inside was a cease and desist letter, not from an attorney but from the HOA board itself. Printed on glossy paper with a gold embossed logo, it accused me of defaming the integrity of the Oakbrush Heights Homeowners Association and demanded that I immediately halt all efforts to undermine community cohesion and goodwill. Maya read the letter out loud, then tossed it on the table. They're bluffing. They know they've been caught with their hands in the till, she said. Anything useful in it? Only that they're scared enough to try intimidation instead of denial. That's a shift. We sat in silence for a few seconds, both watching the footage from the previous night. Another car had driven past my house 4 times in a row without stopping, different model than the SUV before. This time it was a white pickup with tinted windows and no front plate. You think they're trying to shake me? I asked. No. I think they're trying to provoke you into something they can twist as aggression. They want you to swing first. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. A woman was walking her dog across the street, but she paused at my mailbox and stared too long. Then she pulled out her phone and took a picture before pretending to tie her shoe. Maya turned to me. We need to go on a fence. How? I've been digging through their filings. There's a mandatory financial disclosure for every HOA over a certain size in this county. I found one from last year. Want to guess what's missing? Line items. Try entire months of expenditures, she said, flipping her laptop around. From March through June, there's no spending recorded, but a vendor was paid almost $20,000 during that same period with no listed purpose. I frowned. Who's the vendor? Crescent Ridge Solutions. Sounds impressive, right? It's a shell company. Owned by someone named Ainsley Ketteridge. She's listed as a board member on the Oakbrush Heights HOA's website. Vice President. I stood. Let's go meet her. We found her address in the county records office. She lived 6 streets over in one of the bigger lots with a wraparound porch and a 4-car garage. When we rang the bell, she answered wearing a navy blue pantsuit like she just stepped out of a real estate brochure. Her eyes stayed locked on Maya the whole time. Can I help you? She asked, folding her arms. You've been knowingly collecting payments through a company you own, Maya said, without disclosing it to the homeowners. That's fraud. Ainsley's expression didn't change. I don't know what you think you've found, but you're mistaken. I have the corporate registration, Maya replied. Your name's on it, and I've already filed a request with the county to obtain financial records from the HOA's bank. If you want to be the scapegoat for Deborah's operation, be my guest. I'm not answering any more questions without legal representation, Ainsley said and stepped back inside. The door clicked shut. Maya turned to me. She's not the mastermind. But she's got her fingerprints all over the money. Back at my place, 2 more neighbors dropped by. A soft-spoken man named Ranjit who worked in IT and a retired nurse named Colette. Neither had been approached by the HOA directly, but both had been fined repeatedly for vague violations over the past 2 years, one for inadequate lawn edging, the other for excessive doorbell noise. I pointed them toward Maya, and she added their statements to the growing stack of evidence. That night, I wired another camera inside the attic, pointing out from the vent slats, just in case someone thought about coming in from the top. The break came the following Monday. Maya got a call from a former HOA treasurer. She'd seen the flyers we'd been quietly mailing out, nothing inflammatory, just a request for anyone with concerns about HOA spending to contact us. This woman, who asked to be called Louise, had resigned 3 months earlier. She said she'd kept copies of spreadsheets on a portable drive as a precaution. When Maya opened the files, she froze. "What is it?" I asked. "They've been laundering money." The HOA was collecting fines, then funneling them through phony maintenance reimbursements. Crescent Ridge Solutions was the biggest recipient, but there were others: Premier Landscaping, Shaded Path Consultants, and Northwood Infrastructure. All fake. All registered to P.O. boxes, and all tied to Deborah's family and friends. It was enough for the district attorney to call for a grand jury review. The subpoena notices hit the neighborhood like a thunderclap. Subpoenas were delivered to Deborah, Ainsley, and 2 other board members. One of them, a man named Charles Finlay, lawyered up immediately. Another fled the state. I didn't see Deborah for 3 days. Her golf cart sat idle under her carport, covered with a tarp. When I finally did spot her, she was standing in her driveway talking to a man in a blue suit. He looked furious. He kept jabbing a finger at her chest while she shook her head and crossed her arms. By the end of the week, the HOA website went offline. Then came the knock. It was Officer Gutierrez again, but this time he wasn't alone. The detective beside him introduced herself as Detective Claire Henley from the White Collar Crimes Division. "We've reviewed your footage and financial evidence. The DA's office is moving forward with formal charges," she said. "We'll need you to testify when the time comes." "What kind of charges are we talking about?" "For starters, wire fraud, tax evasion, and criminal misrepresentation. Possibly racketeering, depending on what we find in the upcoming audits." "Can they be removed from the board?" "They'll be removed from society if this sticks," Gutierrez said dryly. That night, I sat on the porch with Maya and watched as another car pulled up in front of Deborah's house. This time, it was unmarked. 2 men in suits walked up and handed her a folder. She didn't even argue, just took it and went inside without a word. The silence on the block was different now. Not the watchful, suspicious kind, but the kind that comes before a storm breaks for good. I didn't celebrate, not yet. There was still work to do. Residents needed to vote in a temporary board. The community needed real transparency. And the ones who'd been bullied into silence needed to know they weren't alone anymore. But that could come later. For now, Oakbrush Heights belonged to its residents again, and Deborah, she wasn't calling the shots anymore. By late Thursday, Oakbrush Heights had become a neighborhood under reconstruction, but not the kind you could measure with bricks and paint. Something deeper was shifting. People who'd kept their heads down for years were beginning to step outside, talk to one another, compare notes. The fear that had long held this place in a chokehold was loosening. And it wasn't just about the HOA board anymore, it was about what they had built behind the scenes. Meyer and I had been working out of my dining room, which now looked like a legal war room. Folders, laptops, evidence binders, even a portable printer humming on the floor. I slid a stack of signed affidavits across the table. "These are from homeowners who paid cash to the HOA for expedited processing on permits that never existed," I said. Maya looked up from her screen. "Some of them didn't want receipts. They were told receipts weren't issued for community donations." "That's not just unethical," Maya said. "That's money laundering, that's prison time." Before she could say more, there was a knock at the door, not the usual sharp rap of a delivery or neighbor. This was slower. Hesitant. I opened it to find a man in his 60s, wearing a tan windbreaker and holding a worn leather folder. You Silas? He asked. His voice was raw, like someone who'd been yelling at football games for 40 years. Yeah, he handed me the folder. Name's Arnold, used to be on the architectural committee, back when the HOA was still run by residents, not royalty. Found this cleaning out my garage. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of architectural approvals, violation letters, and handwritten notes dated over a decade ago. But what mattered was the last page, a signature list from an old petition to block Deborah from being granted unchecked administrative access to HOA funds. The request had been ignored. This proves intent, Maya said, stepping beside me. They knew what she was doing and shut down opposition. Arnold shifted, unsure. I never thought it'd go this far. We just wanted someone to keep the lawns neat, not a queen with a credit card. You mind if we use this? I asked. He shook his head and turned to leave. Do what you gotta do. Just make sure she doesn't come back. That night, the grand jury returned indictments. The charges weren't just financial anymore. A forensic audit of the HOA's security spending revealed they'd installed hidden microphones in the community clubhouse and reserved meeting rooms. The justification filed with the vendor was monitoring compliance with board protocols. In reality, they had been eavesdropping on residents during private gatherings. One microphone was found behind a decorative air vent in the community daycare center. That crossed a bright red legal line. The sheriff's department executed a search warrant at Deborah's home at dawn. I watched from my porch as cruisers rolled up with quiet efficiency. Deputies exited calmly, one carrying a clipboard, another in plainclothes with a body cam already rolling. Deborah stepped out in her robe, arms lifted in disbelief, as if the world had suddenly changed languages and no one told her. "I've done nothing wrong," she shouted. "You're being placed under arrest for misuse of community funds, unlawful surveillance, and conspiracy to defraud," the lead deputy said as he read from the warrant. "You have the right to remain silent. You're making a mistake," she yelled. "I was protecting this neighborhood," a murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. People were filming from their lawns, whispering to each other in disbelief. I spotted the marshals 2 houses down, standing hand in hand. Colette stood next to Ranjit, arms crossed, eyes locked on the cruiser. As the door of the vehicle closed with a hollow thud behind Deborah, something settled in the air. A shared breath. Like we'd all been holding it for years. Later that morning, I met with the Interim Oversight Committee, 5 residents elected in an emergency vote held under county supervision. Maya had helped draft the new procedural rules, and a representative from the state HOA regulatory board sat in to ensure legitimacy. "We're implementing a full audit," said the new chairwoman, a retired IRS analyst named Tilda. "Every cent, every contract, every vote they ever took will be reviewed." "Good," I said. "The people here deserve answers," Meyer added, "and restitution. Anyone fined illegally gets that money back. With interest if we can swing it." One of the younger members, a city planner named Jerome, leaned forward. "We're also dissolving the private security contract. No more HOA patrols, no more intimidation." It felt surreal to hear it spoken plainly, like the nightmare had a clear end. 2 weeks later, the community held its first open forum in over 10 years. No one was required to attend, no threats, no fines, just chairs, coffee, and a microphone. People spoke freely. Some vented, others apologized for looking the other way. A few even cried, but no one shouted. No one called the police. When I stepped up to speak, I kept it short. "I moved here to fix up a quiet house," I said. "I had no idea I'd be fixing the whole street, but I'm glad I did, and I'm glad I wasn't alone." Applause followed, not thunderous but honest. That night, I finally took the last box of tools out of the garage and parked my truck inside. I stood in the driveway for a while, just listening. No engines idling, no golf carts circling, just the sound of sprinklers clicking to life. Maya sat on the porch steps, sipping a glass of water. "You realize you just turned a hostile HOA into a case study on community reform, right?" I just wanted to hang my TV without someone calling the cops." "Well," she said, stretching her legs, "you did that, and dismantled a criminal empire in the process." I chuckled. "Didn't mean to go full Erin Brockovich." "Next time," she said, raising her glass, "maybe just join a book club." We sat in silence for a while, watching the street breathe again. No hidden microphones, no fake fines, no laminated threats at the door. Just a neighborhood remembering what it was like to live without fear, and a house that finally felt like home.